Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today for the first webinar in our Feeding Faith Leaders with Community Fervor Spring 2021 series entitled Affordable Housing Development 101 for Houses of Worship. My name is Tim Block, Senior Program Director with Enterprise Community Partners, and I have the pleasure of leading Enterprise's faith-based development initiative in the Southeast. We appreciate all of you taking the time to be here with us today, as it is our pleasure to bring you these webinars that are designed to be a combination of both high-level and deep dive trainings that help participants like yourselves understand the basics of developing housing and other community facilities that can serve congregations and community members. Before we continue with today's program, a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. We ask that you please use the Q&A feature and not the chat when asking questions for our presenters. The chat feature can be used to interact and engage with your fellow participants. Shortly following the webinar, we will be making available the recording, presentation slides, speaker bios, and a survey via email to all participants and placing those items on the resource page of Enterprise's website. With that, now I would like to introduce a great partner and friend of Enterprise, Bruce Gunter, who will be serving as moderator extraordinaire for our discussion. All jokes aside, we couldn't think of many better to lead a conversation on affordable housing development than Bruce. He has both founded and worked in organizations that have developed a remarkably wide range of housing, from affordable rental apartments to luxury condominiums and townhouses, to supportive housing for persons experiencing homelessness. He has served on numerous boards related to housing and social policy. Some say a true indication of who you are is reflected in what your peers think of you. This is what Bill Bowling, founder of the Atlanta Community Food Bank, has to say about his colleague. Bruce has a longstanding devotion and commitment to the community that is reflected in the high quality of his work. We have worked together for over 20 years on housing and community development issues, and I can't think of anyone I would trust more on these matters than Bruce. Bruce, I'll turn it over to you, and no pressure at all, my friend.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for not mentioning my COVID haircut. So good morning, everybody. It's great to be a part of this and talking about my favorite topic, affordable housing. Tim gave me a great bio intro, and I can't improve in that. So I'm going to just sort of jump on into the meat. But I will say right off the bat that I'm a member of a house of worship as well, St. Luke's Episcopal Church in downtown Atlanta, and we're talking about this very topic. So it's very timely. It's hugely important, and as we would say, it's very much win-win-win if you count the community and your own house of worship and the people that would end up living there. So I'll be your moderator, which really means I get to hand off to a panel of three terrific professionals. I know them all, worked with a couple of them for 20 years. And so I think you're in for a treat. And it's going to be substantive and fast. But let me say a few introductory words before we get into the panelists. So first of all, if your house of worship is surplus land and you need either cash flow or capital, then you're in the right place. Secondly, relative to what sometimes can be a little delicate topic when we're in our faith communities talking about filthy lucre and mission and the glory of God and helping out the community, this is the balance that we'll try to talk about and strike when we're talking about developing affordable housing or mixed income housing on your property. So don't worry about that. Striking the balance is really what all is at the heart of this webinar, and there are examples at both ends of the spectrum. You will also hear, in case you didn't already know, of course, this is not a bake sale. This is a very sophisticated undertaking. It's very complicated. It's lengthy, and so forward planning and working in the community of professionals is very important. With great reward comes great risk. Initially, the endeavor is about matchmaking. It's between the conditions on your particular site and your target market. For example, it's in between the set of professionals that you will assemble into a partnership, a development partnership, then an ownership partnership, and also the people in your own congregation that will steward the process for a long time, and that's a very important aspect as well. Finally, it's important to note a real important difference between real estate, conventional real estate, and the professionals on your screen are all involved in it, and houses of worship. And I can attest from St. Luke's, this is very much their perspective. It is one of perpetuity. St. Luke's will never, ever sell its land. It'll lease it out. But unlike conventional real estate developers that may be in it for 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, and then maybe as an owner, 10 or 20, a lot of houses of worship bring to bear a perspective that this is forever. So among other things, that means you don't want to make a mistake. It's going to be real hard to take a building down if you get it wrong, or if you need parking 10 years later, but you sold some property. So these are very important decisions nonetheless. It's not a new idea. Houses of worship have been involved with developing affordable housing, mostly targeted for seniors or very low income individuals for many, many years. Although we will today hear about some very sophisticated, high profile developments. These can also be modest projects. I'm involved with an Episcopal parish in Peoplestown that may be 15 or 20 houses, but it would be really important to the folks in Peoplestown. Let me give you a couple of examples before we turn it over to our 3 panelists. And for the most part, I'm going to let them sort of self-introduce. Providence Missionary Baptist Church in Southwest Atlanta was led for many, many years by the Reverend James Jerry Durley, excuse me. And they worked with colleagues to build seniors housing. Claremont Presbyterian, if you go into Decatur, downtown Decatur is a large, white, monolithic looking building. It's quite bland. And that's an old HUD 202 property that Claremont Presbyterian developed. My own church, along with All Saints Episcopal, did luxury senior housing in Buckhead, Counter Perry Court. And at the other end, the temple, the venerable synagogue at the intersection where Peachtree and West Peachtree and Spring meet, they have held the Zaven Family Shelter there for decades. And it's just terrific supportive housing for families experiencing homelessness. 2 churches on Peachtree, opposite ends of the spectrum. One, St. Mark's in the heart of Midtown. And if you go there on Peachtree, but along the back of their lot, along Juniper, they're constructing a high-rise luxury apartment. A few blocks north, right next to the High Museum, is the venerable First Presbyterian Church. On the other side of Peachtree, they're developing affordable housing. So the point is, there's a wide range. Each house of worship is very different, to state the obvious, and there's a variety of real estate that may be appropriate for your particular piece of property. But of course, today it's on affordable and mixed income housing, which by definition has mission elements as well as sort of capital and cash flow. And then finally, I would point out that this is all about bricks and mortar and finance and spreadsheets and legal documents and whatnot. But if there are members in your congregation that are really moved to work in the policy or advocacy side, do know there's plenty of need for that. And let us know, and we can put you in contact with plenty resources, and join the team for long-term change and not just buildings. So right now, let me turn it over to the meat of the program, and we're going to bring on Kevin Holt. Kevin, I'll ask you to give a few sentences about your background, but I can tell you right off the bat that Kevin has made a very big splash with the project that he's going to talk about at First United Methodist Church, right in the heart of downtown. And without giving away all the fun details, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you and let you talk about that project and how you guys evaluated your situation and got started.
Sure.
Kevin?
Thank you for the introduction, Bruce. I'm almost surprised to be on this panel because I don't have near the background as everyone else here. And it's by happenstance that I got pulled into a great project and we did some great work together, and now I'm here. So I'm happy to be on the panel and join my peers here. Again, my name is Kevin Holt, here to talk about evaluating our situation. And, this was one of the first things that, so first of all, my background is a business owner and entrepreneur here in Atlanta. A good amount of experience in government contracting. I started a food and beverage business years and years ago that grew fairly successfully in Atlanta. And from there, I've kind of dibbled and dabbled in different projects. And because I had a wide range of experiences, including finance and a good amount of, I guess, general deal making, I got pulled in the project. And like most good projects men get pulled into, somehow their wife was involved. And so, you know, my wife called me one day and said, Kevin, I need you to speak to a friend of mine who has a great project. And I met with Pastor Jasmine Smothers. I didn't know Pastor Jasmine, but I knew the church that she was leading, and it was Atlanta First United Methodist Church. And if you're from Atlanta, it is on the corner of Peachtree and Ralph McGill, it's an iconic building on a very busy corner. And so when I met with her, she said, Kevin, I think I may need your help. And I was interested in hearing what she was looking to do, but she started talking about this amazing vision she had for a great project. And she wanted to build affordable housing, which we all know is desperately needed in almost all major cities, right in the heart of downtown Atlanta, which never happens in Atlanta. And so right off the top, I was very interested in her project. And, but before I jumped on the team, I really wanted to understand, you know, I really want to understand what she had, because just having an idea is not enough. And so when we talk about evaluating a situation, it's really taking stock of the assets that you have kind of in-house. And, you know, what we did, and when I evaluated her situation with the church, and I'll just say as an aside, I'm a member of Impact Church, but not a member of Atlanta First United Methodist Church. And I think that was actually a benefit for our project, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But, you know, evaluating the situation was really looking at the physical assets, the financial assets, the human capital, and the political environment. And while you don't need all four of these things to be perfect to create a good project, you do need a few of these. And I would say, from talking to Pastor Jasmine, what I did recognize is the political environment in her church was perfect for the development. She's a very strong leader with a very clear vision. And she had put together an organized team and a structure, which I thought was very viable to get this project done. And like everyone on the screen knows, development is not easy. Affordable development is even harder. And if you don't have a good team to do it, it'll never happen. And so when I met with Pastor Jasmine, I believed in the team and the structure that she had. And so to give you a little bit of background about the church is over 100 years old. And, you know, they had talked about doing this kind of development on the property for over 30 years and had never gotten done. They never made any progress on it. And she had been a fairly new pastor when I met with her. And she had the will of the congregation and support to make this project happen. And I got that when I first met with her and her team. I can tell that everyone was on board. And this was the first time hearing from them that now that the entire congregation was on board to make this project happen. And without that kind of support, these projects are, these projects are so difficult, it's very easy to kind of get off road here and the project to die. And so I recognize that she had the support to move this forward. Hearing more about the project and more about their vision, what we also came to understand is they had, not only did they have good land in the heart of downtown, they had excellent land. And so they had 3 acres on Peachtree Street, which is by far the most coveted street in Atlanta. But it was also zoned SP1. And for those who aren't well-versed in Atlanta zoning, SP1 basically means you can build with as much density, with no parking restrictions, no setback restrictions, it literally as high as you want to. And so in terms of development, that's the density you want because it gives you a lot of flexibility. And so what we talked about is really, you know, what can this project be? And with that kind of zoning, we recognized we had all the possibilities in the world to make a development that fit all the needs of the church and the community. But we also had humble financial resources. If anyone knows about development, it's tremendously expensive. And like most churches, their financial resources weren't that expansive. and they weren't willing to take on debt and risk the church. And so we recognized while we had great land, we did not have money, nearly enough money to do any kind of project to the scale and scope that we thought that we wanted to create. Next, we looked at the human capital. We recognized that while it was a very, very large building on some great property, it's a small church. We didn't have many members, but the members we did have, we had some true technical talent in the church. And so some really smart people. We had attorneys, we had a couple architects, we had people who were well-versed in transportation development. And so we had some great minds who were in the church, but we didn't have any business executives, anyone who had strong leadership skills moving a project forward. And so, when we looked, when Pastor Jasmine looked at their team, she really wanted someone to come on board and be the project manager to kind of lead a team forward for the project. And so after talking to her and her leadership team, she asked me to come on board to lead the project in the project management role. And so one thing that I think that Pastor Jasmine did that was incredible to her credit is she created a very clear structure of how to move this project forward. Internally, they created a development task force, which is about 20 members of the church who wanted to really invest time and energy in this project and who could meet on a regular basis to make sure that this project was going to meet and satisfy all of the wants and desires of the church. But then of that committee, there was a leadership team of 2 or 3 people who would commit even more time to making sure that this project moved forward. And so one thing I don't know if people recognize is the amount of time it takes to move a development project forward is tremendous. It is not a part-time job. It's not a job for volunteers. People really need to dedicate some time and energy towards this because it's just a lot of moving pieces. The other thing that we recognized was the decision we had to make was, do we want to move this project fast just to make some money, or do we want to move this project slow and get it right? And to Bruce's credit, and to Bruce's point, for the church, it was a no-brainer. The church has been around for over 100 years. They want to ensure it's going to be around for another 100 years. And so we thought about, and the church thought about, and they spent weeks talking about what is most important in this project. And they came up with 3 kind of overarching strategic objectives that this project has to achieve to move it forward. It was 1, they wanted to create a liquidity event that would allow them to make some significant reinvestments in the facility. A church being over 100 years old, there's always a lot of deferred maintenance. And they wanted to make sure they could invest in invest in the facilities to make some improvements to make sure it lasts another 100 years. 2, they wanted to create a stream of revenue. I mean, every church knows that to create a stream of revenue outside the coffers, it significantly helps the financial stability of the church. And so they wanted to find a way to create another consistent, forecastable revenue stream that the church could thrive on for generations and generations to come. And 3rd, they wanted to be part of the community. They want to have a bigger role in providing some of the community's needs. Beyond the spiritual needs and worship needs, they want to create obtainable and affordable housing. And so those are the 3 goals that they were explicit about. And that when they were going to look for development partners, if the deals that were offered didn't check these 3 boxes, it was a non-starter. And that was something that I think the church was very clear about, and to their credit, it made the decision-making process very easy. Being a church, what we did recognize is that although we had a lot of smart people, we did not have a team of developers. And so we wanted to get the learning curve very quickly to understand the environment we're working in. And I think John could probably attest to it. One of the things that we did is we literally called everyone in the city of Atlanta to ask questions about and really understand what can we learn, who are the players, and what are we getting into? And we spent probably 6 or 8 months really just digging deep and trying to find out as much as we could. So we called developers, we called consultants, we called attorneys, we called council members, we called the mayor's office the local economic development authority, we called the housing agency, and really just asked 1,000 questions. And what it did is, besides getting smarter about affordable housing, it connected us to more people. And that was the key. It helped us really build out our team to really figure out what we need to be successful here. And so I'll say the two or three people we added to the team that were clutch were, we added an attorney who was Althea Broughton, who was recognized widely and referred many times as being one of the leaders in Atlanta on affordable housing. And we brought on Aldrich Lynch, who was, kind of a unique person who had a skill set of construction, development, and affordable housing. And that's something that was very hard to find in Atlanta. And bringing those two people onto the church's team really helped us flush out a plan to find a development partner. And so after we built out our team, what we did is create an RFP. And this RFP really laid out what we were looking for in our development. And we wanted to make sure that we were explicit so we could really find the perfect partner. And so we took about 2 or 3 months to develop an RFP, and then we publicized it. We put it in the local newspaper, we put it on LinkedIn, the local trade magazines, and then we waited. And so we had an open house. We talked further about our project, and we had a lot of interest. Part of it was because we had some premier real estate and people wanted to be involved in our project. And so we were fortunate that, in which we were so explicit in what we were looking for, that we found a great partner who checked all the boxes. And really, we aligned on being mission oriented alongside the monetary gain that we're looking to create. That mission was the priority and had just as much focus. And I'll say that it all starts with really understanding what we were looking for, what was important to us, and really understanding our situation and what we thought was most valuable to the church in the long term. And so, again, for us, it was really understanding, the physical assets, what we could bring to the table. Do we have a good project that people would want to get involved in? What we needed a capital partner, because we couldn't afford to do this project by ourselves, and we needed an affordable housing team who really understood the market and understood this project where we knew we wouldn't. And creating that team in this environment would allow us to be successful thus far. And we are at this current stage, we have a signed development agreement with a developer. I can mention it is Evergreen Developments out of Chicago. And we have on deck a 2-tower, 14 stories each of affordable housing, 300 units. And this development will also bring the church a brand new day school, community space, and a structured parking garage. And so, these components on Peachtree Street, we think are going to, be exactly what the church is looking for the next 100 years to come. And so I look forward to taking some questions at the end. And Bruce, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Kevin. I actually encourage folks to Google your deal and see those renderings and look at the location. It's a terrific example, and it's also very high profile, and it's just wonderful. 300 affordable housing units in downtown Atlanta will be leased up in a heartbeat. So next up is going to be James Alexander. I've known James for many, many years. He's the president of Mercy Housing Southeast, which was founded, in fact, by the Sisters of Mercy to do affordable housing. And James is one of the most well-known affordable housing developers in Atlanta. We're colleagues on the Atlanta Regional Housing Forum, doing a lot of planning. And James, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the housing typologies and the range of housing options.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. And, always great working with you. And just really impressed by the work that Kevin, the church, and the congregation are undertaking in downtown Atlanta. It's clear that one of the early first things that you can do is to find a Kevin in your congregation or elsewhere to help push things forward. But a tough individual to multiply. So I'm going to try to share my screen. And what I'm going to talk about is some of the building blocks that developers really use and think about when creating a concept for and delivering a development. And, you know, some of these building blocks are ones that people in housing and affordable housing understand and recognize. So it's bringing some common language, blocks, and forms to the table. And some of these blocks are around site conditions, the physical housing, typology, parking, and also, you know, who we're serving or the typology of the customers or clients who will be in the affordable housing development. It's possible to deliver affordable housing outside of these blocks or outside of these forms. It is in no way impossible. I think anytime you're talking about doing, you know, something outside of these forms or blocks, you're really talking about additional money. You're talking about additional time. I think, you know, to Kevin's point about, you know, doing it fast or doing it in a way that's more consistent with the mission and vision of the church. And sometimes it can increase the risk of infeasibility as well. So I'm kind of talking from a developer's perspective as we're looking at entering into a partnership with the church. All right. So I'm trying to advance the screen. There we go. So I think something early on to consider is your actual site. And I think it's good to do because it's observable. You know, you're there frequently, and it's the basis or foundation upon which you would build. So I've seen a number of developments that, you know, ultimately fail because they're on contaminated ground environmentally, or because they're on poor soils. And so it's really good to just look at what you have in combination with an architect and an engineer, but you can also use your own eyes. I think slope is something that's really good to consider when you're looking at your site. Anytime you have a lot of slope, it's going to require a significant amount of grading that adds to cost even before you come out of the ground. Looking at the environmental conditions of the site, I think the advantage of church-owned sites is that, you know, they're not, for the most part, formally industrial sites. And so you're not dealing with as much things like underground storage tanks or, you know, things, you know, asbestos on the site from a previous house that was torn down. You do want to look around your site to kind of see, you know, what might be on an adjoining property that could contaminate the soil on your site. So also be aware of what's around it. And also the soil as well. You know, there are some soils that you can build on and there are others that you cannot. And if you end up building on a site that does have poor soil, you're going to have foundation problems. That's going to be big money problems for the church and the ownership structure long term. So that's important to understand upfront with your architect and engineer. So talking about going vertical, there are a number of housing typologies that lenders will think of, developers will think of, engineers will think of, and it's usually a question that we get early on as we're looking at a site from an architect, which is, you know, what kind of typology are you talking about? There's single family. It's the predominant form of housing in the United States of America, and one we know and love. And, you know, all of these typologies can be built either for sale or for rent, but most of what we find in single family is for sale, and there's a lot of advantages to that in terms of the individual living in it and their family living in it, being able to build wealth and build equity. Some of the major disadvantages are that single families is a land hog. So, if you have an acre of land, you'll see here that traditional single family is around, 13 dwelling units per acre or less. So if you're really thinking about trying to maximize the number of people you're trying to serve, single family may not be the best fit. And for each of these, I'll kind of talk about density and what it is. And I think density is really important to understand how many people you can serve on the site. Kevin talked about the 2 towers, for example. It'll also give you a sense of, what the value of your land is based on how much you can build. And so that knowing that density is really important. It also helps you have conversations with your local jurisdiction in terms of, and the surrounding community about what permissions from a zoning and variance perspective might be needed to achieve that density. So another example here is just cluster homes. This is in the 4th Ward. It's a development called Lambkin Street Cottages. This is about 20 units per acre. And you're seeing more of this. It's kind of missing middle housing. And it's probably what Bruce referred to in Peoplestown. It's not as binary anymore in terms of single family or multifamily. There's more that you will see in between, assuming that the local jurisdiction is supportive and you have a strong architect. You're seeing a lot of townhomes these days. They're popping up all over the city of Atlanta. These are typically 15 to 20 units per acre. And if it is for sale, the owner of the townhome also owns the land underneath them. It can also be a rental structure as well. Another example of this is, I think this is called the Retreat at Edgewood, that's developed by Columbia Residential, that can have, less of a townhome look. And this is affordable housing in the Edgewood neighborhood, financed by low-income housing tax credits. So you can also deliver duplexes, quadplexes. These are a lot of forms that already exist historically in neighborhoods we know and love. You see people building them less today, but I think if you look around in your surrounding community and use some of those building blocks, you'll find that there can be some advantages to these building blocks on your site. We also have garden style apartments. And what we mean by that are typically apartments that are 3 stories or less. They are walk-up apartments. They have several methods of entry into the apartments. They typically do not have an elevator, and they typically are surface parked. So you'll see these in a lot of suburban locations where there's enough land to make this work. And why you see a lot of this is because they are inexpensive to build. It's an inexpensive building block while still providing a significant amount of density. This is an example in Savannah, Georgia. This is called Savannah Gardens. This is also garden style apartments with several entry points into each of the buildings themselves. And you can typically get, again, about 35 units per acre, delivering this in an inexpensive way. There's also something that is a more mid-rise building block. And by mid-rise, I'm typically talking about something with an elevator, something with an interior corridor. with units on either side of that corridor. You'll hear it called a double loaded corridor. And sometimes it's with surface parking, sometimes it's not. And so, with this one, it's about 50 units per acre. This was developed by Mercy Housing, and is also an efficient way to deliver units. All of the ones I've talked about, and this one as well, are primarily built with wood or lumber. And most of the building you see in the United States is built with wood. There may be the skin around it, and you see in this photo here, brick and kind of hardy siding and some other siding. But the predominant way that these are built is with wood. And it really reduces your construction cost as compared to building with steel and concrete. In the United States, you can build 4 or 5 stories with wood before you have to upgrade to steel and concrete. And that's mainly for fire related reasons. But once you get up above that 5 stories, you're really increasing your costs. Not so much today. The costs are closer than they used to be, but historically, you're talking about a 30% increase per square foot.
Hey, James, I'm going to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, sort of, if you could wrap it up, appreciate it.
Yeah. So I think the other forms that you'll find, one is housing that's built on a podium, and just really thinking about how you're parking your units. And that's something that, often owners of land don't think about, is where are those big hunks of metal going to go? And one way that it's addressed is with the podium. So that development that I showed earlier, this is the back side of it. That includes some surface parking and also some tuck under parking with the podium. This podium is expensive and usually is to the tune of $1 to $2 million. So from an efficiency perspective, you really want to try to build wood frame housing. And I'll just go through. This is high rise, and because those costs are much higher with concrete and steel, I think if you're going to go high rise, the bigger the better, and think big. I cannot think of a high rise development I've seen developed in the last 10 years with affordable housing, kind of given those cost issues. But if you're going to do it and you're in a prime location and you have limited land, really, really go for it in terms of the density. So those are some of the housing typologies. And looking forward to the conversation in the rest of the panel.
Great, James, thanks a lot. That was a terrific overview, which is exactly what we wanted to do today. Next, we're going to go to John Top, and I've known John for many, many years. We've been colleagues for a long time. John is the president of Tapestry Development Group and has been, John, you've got a long roster of affordable housing projects and a faith-based development initiative yourself. So we welcome you, John.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Bruce. And thanks, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Tapestry Development Group, we're a 501c3 nonprofit affordable rental housing developer in DeKalb County here, and have projects going on in 4 states, with Georgia being our home base, and certainly will, for a long time, will be the core of our activities, and have just done a lot here in Metro Atlanta as well. We are not a faith-based organization per se, but I am an elder at North Avenue Presbyterian Church, so faith is a lot of the why and how I do what I do. And so, yeah, I am going to talk a little bit about the kind of faith-based initiative we have with the church. And just definitely want to emphasize, Kevin, and then what James reiterated too, working with churches having, a point person. Certainly churches have a hard time figuring out what music to play on Sunday morning and where the flowers are arranged sometimes, to trying to figure out how to do a major real estate development that changes the whole orientation of their church for for decades. So I couldn't emphasize more having kind of doing the internal homework and then having a strong point person the developer can work with. And then, as Kevin did a great job of bringing the right professionals in to advise the church and then doing an RFP to get the right team. So I'm going to share my screen. And so this is a project that we're doing in the city of College Park. And we are partnering and working with the College Park First United Methodist Church. I don't know if you can, my cursor doesn't show up very well, but you can see the building right in the middle. It basically looks like a cross. I don't know if that was a coincidence or not, but that's the main church building. And a lot of the buildings around that campus are existing buildings that the church owns and operates. And it's 120 years old. The city has grown up around it, including, as you can see in the corner, the MARTA station added decades ago, right on basically on their front doorstep. And they are, kind of like Kevin too, an urban church that has a very influential membership in the community, including our city council member here, but is definitely land rich and cash poor and trying to find a way to remain sustainable and, but also be more fully part of the community than a lot of these churches have been historically. So our partners are the church itself, and then we have another group called Good Places that the church hired to help, mostly to kind of think through the master planning and help lease out some of the space. And part of what they did is brought in Push Arts, who some of you may have heard of. They had a strong presence here in the Decatur area for years, and they are now fully set up shop down there and have integrated and are leasing. I have a lot of their own space and space that they're leasing to other artists as studios. So hopefully this case study can help, capture some imagination for you all on some different things that you can do. We have a very uncommon confluence of things that are all coming together here between the city and the church and our development team and then affordable housing. So we were grateful to have been brought in by Good Places and started meeting with the church, and definitely all realized, hey, this part of this land here, it could be a really good fit for affordable housing. So Tapestry's expertise is in the low-income housing tax credit. And as James and others have mentioned, it is the single most powerful tool to do this. So we have to study it. It's got a lot of requirements and very strict ways that you compete within the program and other rules. So, it can be hard to find a match between a site and that program because the scoring and competitiveness is very heavily based on location. So, but we quickly sized up that it was going to be a very competitive score, and between a lot of the other community engagements, the kind of a community transformation plan that's happening within the whole area, and just a lot of other initiatives there, it scored really well. And so we got awarded low-income housing tax credits in 2020 to do this. So we are still well underway and in the design phase, but we are deep into it, and we're really excited about it, and we're very hopeful about it. It is a mixed use campus, so and you can see the building right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. It's basically where it says art on the art walk, that building there. There's going to be a coffee shop that Push is going to help coordinate on the ground floor, so that'll be available and kind of across the street from us. So we are carefully planning this. So there'll be a lot of pedestrian flow between the buildings. We'll have a lot of push activities within our affordable housing piece on the ground floor. Yeah. So, and there'll be, those are for sale townhomes on that art building where it says art. There's for sale condos above that, and some of those will be sold to artists and be used kind of as studio space, but they'll be long-term owners there. So they'll be active in all the other initiatives around there. So the city has been very supportive. We were thankfully mostly zoned properly for this. It's a transit-oriented development zoning, so that made it possible. We had a lot of community opposition, but the city was really supportive and stepped up for us. And I'll just mention too, we had a very uncommon situation of having the pastor of the church being a very, very strong leader in this. And, again, that really helped this happen. She had to manage not just internal politics within her church and win them over, but, on the denominational level, because the denomination basically, had the final say on whether or not this land would be sold. So she managed that as well. And then she also, to my surprise, but it turned out to be the best way to go, took the lead on a lot of the public engagement and the city, and helping us, make some of those first steps on some of the rezoning and variances, the zoning variances and things that we needed to make this feasible. So, not every development will be able to have such a strong leader that, she's a pastor to the church and has a real estate background. So she's been a really good fit for the church in executing this. So, so that's a brief overview of kind of where we are. And again, the low-income housing tax credit is extremely complicated. This is on an urban scale, so it does have to fit in with those requirements to be usable, but when you can do it, it can really be great. And we paid the church, basically full market value. So that brought a lot of value back to the church. So I'm a little over my time, so I'll stop there and welcome any questions.
Thank you, John. And I think it's fair to say that we hope that we're whetting your appetite with this introduction. There's many more details, and of course, enterprise. This is the first one in a series. So we will entertain a few questions, and Tim and I think, are going to go back and forth on the questions. I've got a couple that have come in, and then at 12 o'clock, we're on schedule. No worries. We'll go to Tim for a close. There was a question that came in about sort of a little political guidance or a question about legal structure. And I think it's fair to say, get ready for your church to give up control of the project. It'll be a part of a partnership document. This is, again, a sophisticated legal document. And yet, at the end of the day, there is that church-state separation, and you will be seeking out typically public financing sources. And I think typically the house of worship will need to be prepared to throw in the land. In John's case, maybe unusual, you were able to pay the church full market value, which is terrific, but that may not always be the case. But if you are in a partnership, the church will have to give up control in order to get public financing and in a legal partnership document. Sort of the political aspect too is not to be ignored. We really didn't touch on that. It's safe to say that you will need allies and advice up and down. HUD, it could be, or your city council, it could be, but there are people that know and control the purse strings of various public financing options. And so the first thing is presenting a project that the community will really need and support. That's the first thing out. There was a second question about the missing middle. I think Kevin referred to it. Somebody referred to it. Maybe James referred to it. I think the missing middle has several definitions. And one way to think of it is if you go in Midtown Atlanta and you see all those high-rise luxury apartments going up, or the very luxury single-family houses that are sprouting around all Atlanta, you know that the market can finance luxury housing no problem. It was said that 95% of the apartments in the city of Atlanta in the past 5 years were luxury, 95%. At the other end of the spectrum, down in the affordable housing world where we work, there are funding programs to work with low-income households and individuals. It's not enough, but there are there. And the point is that the middle is missing. Folks that, I used to think $75,000 was a lot of money, but it's now hard in the city of Atlanta to find a really good apartment rental or buy a house with that kind of income. So as we all know, costs have outstripped incomes in the field of housing, and that gives rise to the missing middle. I think another aspect about the missing middle is the typology that James referred to. If you have an acre of land and you put 3 houses on it, they're necessarily going to have to be very expensive. If you put 30 small townhouses or tiny houses or quads and duplexes or apartments, then sheer economies of scale, just do the math relative to density, you're going to be able to address the missing middle. And that's really just a pure mathematical exercise and a function of density. So those are the two questions that we came in. Tim, were there any others that you fielded, or perhaps you can
Yes,
elaborate?
Bruce, I just sent a third question. It's similar to the last question, and it was from the same person. How do you fund small-scale affordable housing? These are small churches in residential neighborhoods, and the zoning does not allow for high density.
Good question. And unfortunately, to some degree, if you step into this field, you're going to have to do the same amount of work for 10 units as you would 100 units. It's economies of scale. And frankly, if your house of worship is looking for cash flow or capital, doing a whole lot of work for a very small return might not make any sense. So that is one primary example. A lot of these projects tend to be as large as they can. I say unfortunate because sometimes neighborhood local churches or houses of worship, they're part of the community, and the community doesn't want. They don't want a high rise. They don't want a mid rise. They want appropriately scaled housing, and it's a little harder to do. And some of the funding sources give advantages to more units. On the other hand, and if you take your time, the church can maybe self-fund some of this. You could do capital campaigns and approach foundations. Of course, if the foundations, you're going to have to separate a legal entity that's not controlled by the church. But there are ways to do, I mentioned a 20-unit development, but if you do 2 or 3 or 4 houses, I don't really think that this is applicable. This is not what we're talking about, are really maybe 20 units and up, if that helps. Any other questions, Tim?
I don't see any other questions in the Q&A at this time. So if there are any questions, I think we have a few more minutes, just a couple. Well, I think one just came in. Oh, no, it was thank you from the person that asked the last question. So
I had one thought too, and just there's certainly a lot of properties that there's just not a lot of options on, and it's a small tract, and so and it certainly could make sense, if you just have a couple acres next to your church and need some money, that you just sell it to a single family developer, and they build a couple townhomes, and they might be high end or something, so that sometimes might just be what makes sense if money, but we certainly, a lot of churches we know are just saying, hey, there's a real estate broker, there's some that specialize in selling church land, and they just say, hey, broker, take this and run with it and just get us some money. And that is certainly an opportunity for some, and a way to go, and might be what's needed at the end. But certainly, if you're on this, you're definitely thinking about it, like maybe we take some extra time and put in a lot of work to do something that's mission based, and is a deep investment in the community and all that. And it's going to take long, and it's going to be messy. And so commend you to think about that whenever you know there could be easier options just to sell it and flip it to get the money. So we've talked to talked to some different groups about that, and they're having that very struggle. So.
Thanks, John. I want to elaborate on something James brought up that no developer likes to talk about. None of us do, and it's parking. And James, you were good enough to show some examples of different kind of parking. It's expensive. And I alluded to making mistakes. And I can tell you 2 or 3 churches right now that are in the Atlanta area that sure wish they didn't sell off their land 10 years ago, or when they did, wish that they had gone to the expense to build a parking deck or structured parking. And I think that early on, that's where it dovetails with the strategic planning of your own house of worship. You may be low in attendance now, but maybe in 10 years, if your neighborhood grows around you and you need more parking and you don't have it, your house of worship may not flourish. And so, and it's really a lot of that is about parking. So do consider it early on and think long-term, in perpetuity, by the way. So Tim, I believe our agenda says that you have a rousing closing speech for us, and it probably is time to turn it over to you to bring it to a close.
all right. Thank you, Bruce, and thanks Kevin, James, and John for your time and for sharing a wealth of information. I'm confident that our participants learned a great deal. They've been responding in the Q&A and saying that exact thing. So thank you so much. In closing, Enterprise continues to believe that houses of worship and the faith community can play an important role in addressing the affordable housing crisis by utilizing the undeveloped and or underdeveloped land that they own to provide affordable housing units. And we're happy to help them figure out the housing development piece through our faith-based development initiative. There are a few different on-ramps as it relates to our FBDI, faith-based development initiative. If you're a house of worship that feels it is further along in the development process, then completing Enterprise's faith-based development initiative organizational assessment / joint venture worksheet might be a good next step for you so that Enterprise and the partners that we work with will have a better understanding on how we can better assist you specifically with your project. To get a copy of the organizational assessment worksheet, please reach out to me at the contact information on the slide. If you're still trying to wrap your head around everything that you learned today and the overall development process, then continue to participate in our faith-based development initiative webinar series, maybe right where you need to be right now. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, May 27th, where we'll do a deep dive on Performers, which is a tool for real estate analysis. With that, thank you again for joining us today and have a blessed rest of the day, everyone.